Nobody wants to talk about it. It's not open for discussion. You can't talk about, they even try to crush any memory of what happened in 1989. When will China have that kind of historical reckoning? When will the party go back and say, look, we made some mistakes? Ask a question that might be slightly provocative, don't mean it to be, but I mean it, and I mean it with all seriousness. I mean, most people would say that the vast majority of Chinese support what the Communist Party has done and what the Communist Party is doing. Why don't they have an election?
Would you characterize China as a real need of Xi Jinping eliminating the two-term limit on the presidency, with some analysts arguing that this is a sign of the atrophying of the party itself and a sort of, I guess what Keith was saying earlier about a move away from collective leadership. What are your thoughts on Xi's move, and has there been any pushback within Hi everybody, welcome to this evening's FCC Zoom event. I'm Rebecca Bailey. As you'll all know, the CCP is celebrating its 100th anniversary on the 1st of July. If you've been watching the news today, you'll have seen the very grand ceremonies start to kick off. The party's ability to reinvent itself over the course of the last century has led to it being able to cement itself into pretty much every aspect of Chinese society today. It's been called the most powerful political machine ever created, and its power does not seem to be waning at all today. But the question we're asking is, can it reinvent itself enough to stay in power for another 100 years? And to answer that question, we're joined by a very distinguished guest, Eric Lee. I'm going to hand over straight away to our moderator, FCC President Keith Richburg. Keith, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I think we'll see you later on if we get some questions coming in. And thank you, Eric, for joining us. We really appreciate it. I'm here in Hong Kong. You're in Shanghai, correct?
Yes.
That's the founding of the Communist Party, if I'm not mistaken. So are you there for the birthday party?
I'm not here for the birthday party. I'll try to go there on Thursday.
All right.
Where the first Congress took place.
Okay. Well, let's get right to it. I think you've got some opening remarks you want to make on our theme, and then I've got some questions, and we'll get to some audience questions before we go. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to you, Eric.
Well, thank you, Keith. I'd like to thank the FCC for having me here tonight. So there's an old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And the Chinese Communist Party is about to reach 100 years of age. As a political organization, though, is it getting old? Or is it still young and therefore can learn new tricks? I'd like to explore the answer to this question, and that would determine the answer to the larger question posed as a title to this talk. The past 5 to 10 years have been a transformative era for China, both in terms of its self-perception and its perceived relations with the world. The changes that have been taking place have far-reaching implications, I think. And I like to argue that this transformation is driven, at least in decisive part, by the party's undertaking of a major self-reinvention. Actually, self-reinvention has been a hallmark of the party. I count at least 2 major self-reinventions in the past. One was in 1949, when the party transformed itself from a revolutionary fighting force into a governing institution. Few predicted it would last, but it did. The second was in 1979, as we all know, when the party reinvented itself from a closed and centrally planned economy manager to a market economics reformer. I'd like to suggest that a third one is taking place right now. And the most important aspect of this current reinvention of the party is that it is winning the hearts and minds of China's youth. In terms of China's own development, now the most significant event was the 19th Party Congress in 2017. It was then that China officially declared a paradigm shift, namely from a single-minded pursuit of economic development to the goal of achieving more balanced development and what is called common prosperity. Now, this pivot did not come out of blue. It was the culmination of economic and social developments some years in the making. China's headlong pursuit of economic growth in the last 30 to 40 years since Deng Xiaoping's reforms had achieved tremendous results, as we all know. But new challenges also emerge as results or side effects of market economics. Official corruption, inequality, and environmental degradation, to name three major ones. Now, corruption was tackled ferociously beginning with the 18th Party Congress in 2012 with notable results. On the social and economic fronts, we have observed significant social trends taking place in Chinese society, especially among young people. Those who were born post-90 and post-2000, the so-called 90后 and 00后. Now, they're qualitatively different generations from previous generations, from my generations, for instance. They've grown up with a lot of education in a China that has been increasingly prosperous and strong. As opposed to my own generation, we were primarily concerned with China being poor and lacking development. So we wanted market economics to propel development, almost no matter what the costs. Now, these new generations, they see the main challenges to them and Chinese society as a whole rooted in inequality. There are many significant signs that indicate young people's perception of capital and market have turned negative, and their support for socialism and communism have increased markedly. Now, the party is seeking to get ahead of the trend and rebalance economic gains to build a more equitable society. The intense campaign to eradicate extreme poverty in the entire Chinese nation was historic and unprecedented. The recent government initiatives to rein in monopolistic companies is another example of effort from the other end. It's called containing the unchecked power of capital. I believe we're only seeing the beginning of this paradigm shift. This presents a challenge to the party. China's young generations want to fix inequality, but also they desire economic opportunities that will continue to raise their standard of living. So the country needs to continue on this path of sustained economic growth for obvious reasons. Now, how to achieve a more equitable society of common prosperity while at the same time keep China's society entrepreneurial, which is essential for further growth, is the challenge. And this is the trend that we ought to watch. Another paradigm shift has occurred in the same period, and it was China's perception about the world and its relations with it, especially the West. I would probably put the pivoting moment at 2016. The Trump era showed the Chinese people in America that was so drastically different from the perception they had for many decades. My generation looked up to America, and many even advocated China change its political system and ideology in favor of liberalism. Now, young generations today, they see an America that is rather belligerent toward China, of course, and that is poorly governed, with inequality problems worse than China's own, with politics that seems so dysfunctional and society so polarized and hostile from within, and a bit of a bully on the world stage. So as I said before, the post-90 and 2000 generations are very different. So their perceptions of America and the West are fundamentally different from ours when we were at their age. And several significant recent events helped to consolidate this shift. One was the pandemic, of course, how China handled it and how it was attacked initially and to this day. And they see how the US and Europe have handled it. And then came the attacks on China with regards to Hong Kong and Xinjiang. I'm not here to debate the specifics of these issues or the merits of these issues. I'm just pointing out that the Western attacks on these two issues have caused a near total loss of their credibility in the Chinese public. A vast majority of Chinese public resent the Hong Kong protests and the violence. That's just a fact. And everyone here knows the Uyghur population of Xinjiang has more than doubled. And for Western government and the media to call it a genocide seems totally politically motivated. So, for many years, Western criticism of China did have some support within the Chinese public, especially among the commercial and intellectual elites, because some of these criticisms resonated and the Chinese knew they had problems. But this time is different. This time they see a portrayal of China in the West that is so dramatically different from the China they live and experience every day, especially among the young people. As I said, the post-90s and 2000 generations are more patriotic and more confident to begin with. and they respond naturally to the party's call for greater confidence in China's own path. Indeed, contemporary Chinese youth are on course to be the strongest supporters within Chinese society of the party's long-held goal of pursuing China's own development path, both politically and economically. I would argue that today's Chinese youth, their dispositions and their inclinations are more in sync with the party's outlook and intent than ever before. Nearly 400 million strong, the post-90s and post-2000s, the 90后and 00后, 400 million of them, they form the backbone of China's future. And the party's current vigorous self-reinvention is placing itself at the vanguard of Chinese youth. This indicates that it is still young indeed. The question is, can the party harness this synergy with China's new generations and turn it into effective governance for the long term? The party needs to steer the raw energy and aspirations of China's youth toward productive socialism and away from excessive populism, toward healthy patriotism and away from narrow nationalism. If it can do this, it will deliver on the material and spiritual aspirations of China's new generations. And as a result, I think will stay in power for a very long time to come. Now, success is not assured, but I wouldn't bet against it. Thank you, Keith.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. We've got a lot to pick apart there. So thanks for agreeing to take some of our questions. You know, this question of whether China can keep growing and whether the party can stay in power is occupying everybody. You know, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and this just came out, the latest edition of Foreign Affairs. The cover is, "Can China keep rising?" So everybody's asking. That. You have that too. So everybody's asking the same questions. A lot of questions in there. Let me pick apart the membership of the party. First of all, it's 92 million members, according to a survey recently by Zhongnan University, I believe. They said of the 2.1 million new members that came in 2015. Only something like 5,700 were migrant workers, and the vast majority were actually urban white collar people from Shanghai, where you are, Beijing, et cetera. So my question is, does this party have any relation to the Marxist-Leninist party that was founded in 1921 that was supposed to be workers and peasants? I mean, what's Marxist-Leninist about it now?
Well, good question. Obviously, it's still a Marxist party. Its ideology is both Chinese tradition and Marxism. What's called the sinification of Marxism. Now, I'll give you another number. Of the new members of the Chinese in 2019, okay, nearly 2 million new members, new people joined the party. 80% of them are people under age of 35. Okay, so it's a very, very young trend. And those young people, of course, if you know, in China, and most of them are college students. Now, 80%, last year, 80% of all college students in China express a strong interest in joining the party. Okay, so if you know Chinese society, we have the college entrance exam, Gaokao, okay, which is, you know, one line equal to everybody. And if you visit Chinese college campuses, you'll know these kids come from all backgrounds. Unlike, you know, universities and colleges you find in many Western countries. They come from wealthy families, mostly from certain races. Mostly, I think. I mean, of course, they have affirmative action in America, but we all know. But in China, college students, those who enter college from, you know, vast different backgrounds, from poor, rich, urban, rural, all sorts of places. And 80% of them want to join the party. So I think the party still is very much with the vast majority of the Chinese people.
Well, let me continue on that, because this Zhongnan University and a couple of others, Zhongnan I'm looking at specifically, they surveyed 1,800 new party members and asked them why they joined the party. And the vast majority said career advancement. So they weren't joining it because they believed in the ideals. They were joining it because they wanted to get a better job. And, you know, they thought when you're applying for a job, it's better to be a party member. Is that really meaning that they're believing in the ideals of the party, or they're just doing it to advance their careers?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And I hope that the two coincide. I hope those who believe in making China a better society also find better jobs.
Fair enough. And let me ask you, the reinvention, I think, and I agree with you. I think one thing about the Communist Party is it's reinvented itself several times in the past. But another one of the strengths of the Communist Party, as far as I know it, and I've been looking at it for a couple of 4 decades going back now, has always been self-criticism. They've always gone back and self-criticized when things and said, look, we made mistakes. Now we're correcting those mistakes. There doesn't seem to be a lot of self-criticism now. And I say very specifically that, for example, there are whole areas of the past that are just off limits for discussion and debate. You don't hear any discussion about the Great Famine. You don't hear any discussion about the Cultural Revolution, certainly not 1989. And it almost seems as if everything started with the opening and reforms. Nobody ever wants to talk about what came before. Is that healthy?
Well, let me disagree with that.
Okay.
I think there's a extraordinarily high degree of self-criticism within the party right now through this self-reinvention. Okay, now, first of all, self-criticism is only useful when it's relevant. And let me just point out, the party is being engaged in 3 major areas of self-criticism since the 18th Party Congress. One is political corruption. Okay, from 2012 on, every single newspaper, every single television, you can't get away from Chinese official media without reading and hearing about the horrible situation with corruption. And they attacked it because of that self-criticism. Okay. Second, environmental degradation. Okay, you can't get away from media reports from the party itself about we got to fix the environment, we screwed up. Okay, and anybody who lives in Beijing will tell you how much improvement they've had in their air in the past 5, 6, 7 years. Okay, 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years ago, you go to Beijing, you can hardly catch a day with blue sky. Now most days are blue sky. Okay, self-criticism. Third, most important right now, inequality. Okay, you know, the last campaign to eradicate extreme poverty in the country, the campaign lasted about 8 years. They took the last 99 million people out of absolute poverty. Mm-hmm. Nearly 2,000 party members died in the process. Okay, several million of them went to the front lines. They went to rural areas with harsh conditions. Okay, so why did they do that? Self-criticism. They realized there was a problem, that economic reforms have lifted a lot of people, made a lot of rich people, and built this great big middle class, but many millions of people were left behind. And there was something wrong with that. So the entire campaign was driven by self-criticism.
Yeah, fair enough. Those are all 3 fair points of self-criticism. I guess what I'm thinking about is, and again, bear with me here for a second, if you look at what's happening in the United States now, where they've had a lot of historical problems with slavery, racism, they're going through this cathartic moment where they're discussing all of these issues. Europe as well, after the Black Lives Matter movement, Europe is going through a reckoning with its own past of colonialism, et cetera. In China, it seems, again, the past is always blocked off. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's not open for discussion. You can't talk about. They even try to crush any memory of what happened in 1989. When will China have that kind of historical reckoning? When will the party go back and say, look, we made some mistakes? That doesn't diminish their power now.
Well, race is always a big problem in America. I know that's from the country's DNA. So I think I will support a greater discussion in America. And that came very late. You know, come on. When did Lincoln live? 150 years ago? Whenever it was. Okay, now you're doing this and you call it self-criticism and you're asking China when you're gonna do it about 1989? Come on, cut people some slack.
Well, I think we didn't wait until after, it's been since Lincoln that we've discussed race in America.
I'm sure things that have happened in the history of the People's Republic will be discussed much sooner than how soon you address the race problems in America.
Okay, fair enough. Let me just ask you a couple more questions here. First of all, the party used to, and one of its other strengths, I mentioned one strength was always self-criticism. Another one was it always allowed a lot of decentralization and a lot of innovation at the local level. And when I was covering China, there was a lot of stuff with grassroots democracy going on in villages and in counties. I don't hear about that anymore. It seems to be more of a top-down, no innovation. And I've never even heard anybody speaking about this kind of village elections or grassroots democracy. What happened?
Well, the pendulum does swing from one period to another. You know, and in the history of the People's Republic, the pendulum has swung several times between decentralization and centralization. Okay, and it will take too long to go into that history.
I know the cyclical history.
Right, but you know, we had a period of decentralization for a couple of decades, and it's now swinging towards more centralized power. I think that's correct, driven by changes in circumstances and the needs of the development of the country. But I'll tell you, there's still tremendous amount of innovation and policy innovation and economic activities at the local level. So if you, I mean, I was just in Suzhou, I was in Yiwu, other, you know, different cities in China, different counties. The county governments, provincial governments, they're being very aggressive in coming up with economic development policies that work within the specific circumstances in the regions they're in. Very aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Wang Yang, when he was in charge of Guangzhou, was credited with a lot of innovative policies there, and he moved up to the center. But, you know, I mentioned, you know, self-criticism was always a strength. Local decentralization and local innovation was always a strength. A third strength, I think, and people have credited this, was always collective leadership. You know, nobody got too powerful and leaders stepped aside. Does China still have that kind of collective leadership?
Well, that's also the pendulum does swing. And has swung for many times between collective and more centralized, more collective, less collective. You know, during the 16th and 18th Party Congress, those 10 years, they had 9 members on the standing committee of the Politburo. It was, you know, bigger than before. So the pendulum swung toward, you know, a greater collection, a larger number of people at the top, and there's something good about it, but also it led to certain inefficiencies, certain power being diffused, and now they're in a new phase. So they shrank it at the 16th Party Congress back to 7, and then of course we have a leader that seems to be more powerful than leaders in the past, but you know, the pendulum does swing. I mean, I think it is still the decisions are made by the Central Committee under the leadership of the Party Secretary General and the Standing Committee of the Politburo. That system, those institutions stay intact.
Is it fair to say, and you may disagree with me here, but is it fair to say that the party, at least with this new centralized leadership and Xi Jinping in power, they don't like dissent? I mean, they don't like criticism. They don't like dissent. There have been academics who've been, you know, lost their jobs for dissenting. There have been bloggers who've been arrested. My question is, where are the checks and balances if you've got that much power centralized and you don't like criticism, you don't like dissent?
Well, I'm not so sure the kind of dissent that you have in liberal societies and how productive that is. You know, the kind of dissent that you're talking about, I mean, I assure you, there are a lot of criticism in China. There are a lot of differences of opinions within the party institution when they discuss policies at different levels, lots of debates. And all the policy decisions that come out at the end are results of debates, vigorous debates. I know that for a fact. But the kind of dissent that you're talking about, I don't think we need in this country. Just look at the countries that have it. They're not being governed very effectively. They are polarized. Their government is dysfunctional. Their people hate each other. Their medias hate each other. We don't want that.
Okay, but I mean, you know, when you think about it, though, that's a good answer. But when you think about it, the party, 92 million members, that's only 6% of the population of China, which is about 1.3 to 1.4 billion. Can 6% of the population really represent, you know, the entire population of China?
It is bigger than what I call the Holy Trinity that runs America. The Holy Trinity, America is also in some way a one-party state. and it's run by a party called the Holy Trinity. I call it Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and Hollywood. These three groups of people, including the nannies that they employ, no more than 1 million people. They make all the decisions in America. That's why you have all these dissatisfaction in the country.
Well, some people would add in the gun lobby and a lot of others in there as well.
Gun lobby too.
Into that trinity. Yeah. But seriously, I mean, what are the checks and balances in a one-party state? What if Xi Jinping's got something wrong?
Oh, let me tell you, without real checks and balances, the party will not have survived this long. Okay, so when we talk about all these abstract concepts like checks and balances or democracy for that matter, okay, we ought not only focus on procedure. We ought to focus on outcome. Okay, when you have these really beautiful things like checks and balances and democracy and people's will, when you have them, the outcome should be success. Success means people are satisfied and their lives are getting better and they look towards the future with optimism and society is cohesive. Okay, I don't care what kind of procedures you have. If you don't achieve those outcomes, I don't think you're democratic. I don't think these checks and balances do any good.
So are you one of those who believes that the East is rising and the West is in decline?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms. I mean, I'm one that I hope liberal societies could rejuvenate themselves. You know, liberalism needs some self-criticism. Liberals in liberal societies should learn from the party state in China. The party state in China is being very good at self-criticism. That's why they reinvent themselves. You only reinvent yourself when you see problems. Otherwise, why would you reinvent yourself, right? So liberal societies have been failing at that for the past decades because they take their system for granted. They think there's some kind of moral imperative that somehow they take their system as a given that it works. It's the best thing you've got. So of course, you don't need self-criticism. You don't need to reinvent yourself. I hope for a world where we have a degree of pluralism, a degree of plurality, different kind of systems and ideologies could coexist and compete. So I wish liberalism well.
Well, okay, let me ask a question that might be slightly provocative. Don't mean it to be, but I mean it, and I mean it with all seriousness. I mean, most people would say that the vast majority of Chinese support what the Communist Party has done and what the Communist Party is doing. Why don't they have an election? Like in Singapore, where the ruling party has been in power, they have elections to legitimize their rule every once in a while, and they continue to stay in power. But that kind of rejuvenates and allows them to claim legitimacy from the people.
Well, we have a system of selecting capable people from the population and move them up to lead the country. And they've proven to be great leaders and effective leaders. They have delivered. Countries, I mean, Singapore is a small place. I don't want to use it as an example. Okay, countries, especially big liberal societies, at least in the past few decades with your elections, have not been able to produce leaders that are capable and effective and can deliver. So the best way for you to convince the Chinese to have elections to make yours work.
Well, let me ask you the question then. Without elections, where does the Communist Party in China get its legitimacy? They were originally a revolutionary party. They won the war.
They get their legitimacy, like I said, based on outcome. Okay. Procedural legitimacy, I think, is what is getting liberal societies in trouble. It's what getting liberal politics in trouble. As long as you follow procedure, even if you elect people that are completely incompetent, even if you elect people that are selfish, that are corrupt, that don't deliver, you're still legitimate. We don't want that. We want leaders who get their legitimacy by delivering. If you can deliver the goods, you are legitimate.
So it's performance-based legitimacy, correct?
Whatever you want to call it. I think democracy needs a set of new measurements. I think democracy needs to be measured by outcome, not by procedure.
But what happens in China if the economy suddenly collapses? You've got a demographic challenge looming ahead. You know, you could always have some economic problem with debt, et cetera. If the party is tying its fate to making people richer, how long can that go on? Again, the question,
I'm not sure
can China keep rising?
I'm not sure the party is tying itself by making people richer. I don't think it's the right term to put it. The party right now, like I said, in this current phase of reinvention, is tying itself with the future of China that's more equitable and productive, not making just a few rich. They want to lift everybody. Okay, they are tying their legitimacy with that mission. And I think most of Chinese people agree with that mission. And they need to succeed. If they fail, they'll lose legitimacy.
Okay.
If they succeed, they'll keep that legitimacy for a very, very long time.
Okay, so there's no need for any kind of election, no need for even a referendum on whether you support the party.
I've already said what I wanted to say. Like I said, if they deliver, they will have legitimacy. Okay,
Sure.
We don't want a system where you hold a vote and you don't deliver and you're still legitimate. That's bad.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you something that often has me scratching my head, and a lot of outsiders who care about China have been following it a long time, scratching our heads, which is at the time when the party and President Xi are at the peak of power, China is about to become the world's top economy, if not already there. They're at the peak of their military success. Why are they so thin-skinned? Why is it that a basketball owner who I've never heard of can put out a tweet and all of a sudden it hurts the feelings of the Chinese people? So you take the NBA games off the air, or you can shut down a newspaper because it's running editorials that somehow are threatening the national security of China. I mean, why so thin-skinned? And particularly those young people you mentioned can be online very thin-skinned about what I consider very minor things.
I don't know. I think you got to put yourself in their shoes. I think the West, especially America, have been extraordinarily arrogant. You've been lecturing everybody so much everywhere in the world. You're so used to lecturing people and humiliating people. You don't think you're humiliating them. And finally, you got somebody who's grown big enough and say, no, we're not going to take that anymore. And you think they're thin-skinned. And if that's the case, that's okay.
Well, when a Chinese communist group puts on Twitter a picture of a rocket going up saying, here's China lighting a fire next to Indians cremating people because of the virus, and say, this is how we light a fire. This is how India lights a fire. Isn't that being arrogant?
I'm not sure. I've seen that picture before. I don't know what the intent of that picture is, but I think it expresses a particular view. It's a view that the Indian people are not being treated well. The leadership of India needs to have some self-criticism. It speaks for millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people in India that are suffering. I mean, how can you, there's nothing wrong with that.
How about when
think about these people who are dying, who are sick, who are really being buried every day. You can't even put out a picture and say something for them.
How about when, I don't think that was, I think it was mocking India, quite frankly.
I don't know.
How about these Twitter accounts coming out from people in China and some of these young people you were talking about that were mocking New York because of the number of dead during the coronavirus, or they've been mocking Australia because of a situation that happened before with Afghanistan. Do you think that's been a winning friends?
No, I don't know what you're referring to. If you're referring to the oil painting of an Australian soldier putting his knife in an Australian girl, I totally support it. I think it's a horrible thing these Australian soldiers did. Okay, and this is an artist rendition of the tragic events that took place in Afghanistan. It is not mocking. It is serious.
So you think these kind of wolf warriors?
It was a crime. It was a crime, and they needed. Yeah, an artist attempted to call it that, to show it to the world what happened. It was an artistic rendition. It wasn't a photograph. It was a painting.
And so you mentioned countries being arrogant. You don't think China is acting arrogant now?
I hope we won't be arrogant. All right. But even if we are, we're far behind someone else.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Another question. China's at the top, as I mentioned, they're at the top of their power economically, militarily, et cetera. But, I just looked at the recent Pew survey of 14 countries, and just excuse me for looking down. I want to get it accurate. Negative views of China have increased in every one of the countries that they surveyed. 81% negative in Australia, 74% in UK, Germany, 71% negative, Spain, 63% negative, South Korea, 75% negative, US, Canada. I mean, the negative views of China and negative views of Xi Jinping in Asia and in Europe and in the US and Canada. Why is that?
I've seen those numbers, and it's very interesting until I noticed something else. Okay, I noticed a very interesting trend, and that sets China apart from these other countries, many of these countries. Okay, in China, we have two trends going in opposite directions. Okay, in China, we have the Chinese people's view of their own government, of their own country, is improving significantly. They're getting more and more positive. Yet, other peoples in other countries, their view of China have been deteriorating. Then you notice these people's views about their own countries and about their own governments are also deteriorating. So they're just unhappy.
Well, if you dig into those numbers, what it actually says, what the Pew report says, is that this negative view of China and negative view of Xi Jinping's ability to handle things are directly related to the coronavirus. And particularly because you mentioned, and I think it's correct, that once February of 2020 came along, China, with its lockdowns and quarantine, managed to handle the virus extremely well. But nobody likes to talk about what happened in December of 2019 and January of 2020, when they were locking up doctors and arresting bloggers who were trying to warn the world what was going on. Hey, why won't China become more transparent and allow people unfettered access to find out what happened?
Keith, we had our first known case of coronavirus at the end of December 2019, at the almost last few days of the year, okay? And we had the Wuhan lockdown in January 20-something. Merely 3 weeks passed from the first known case of a virus that's completely unknown to mankind to a complete lockdown of a major city and a major province in China. That was also unprecedented in human history. 3 weeks, we showed the world how serious this virus was in action. 3 months later, 6 months later, in America and Europe, you were still debating whether you ought to wear masks.
Why were doctors being being called into the police for trying to tell the world?
Wait a minute. You can talk about all these specific events you want. I can go to America and find all these things that are happening in America. Okay, you guys were in America and Europe. You were debating whether people were protesting about wearing masks. They're insulting people. Political leaders in America were insulting American people for wearing masks.
Nobody's defending America. We're talking about China here.
Yeah, what I'm saying is you got to cut people some slack. You can't be too arrogant. Okay, don't be too arrogant. We had 3 weeks. It took us 3 weeks, like I said, from the first known case of coronavirus, of a virus that was completely unknown to the world, ever in history. It took us 3 weeks to shut down an entire city of 10 million people.
There were supposed to be
enough to show the world how serious it was.
There was supposed to be some information sharing that was set up after the SARS epidemic between doctors in China and the world, and that didn't happen.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. You got to read the history. The genome sequence of the coronavirus was put into NIH in Bethesda and shared with the world, I think, in the first 2 weeks of January. Like I said, again, it took us 10 days, took China 10 days, maybe 2 weeks to share the genome sequence with the entire world. Okay, look, we're all at the same starting point. Everybody was surprised by the virus. We weren't geniuses here. It took us some time to figure out whether it was serious to begin with, okay? And it took us 3 weeks. We showed the world in action how serious it was. We locked down Wuhan. We locked down Hubei province. Okay, nobody's ever done it in human history.
Well, look, I'm not going to go back and debate the history of that, but what I want to ask you, the question is, again, I'm going back to these negative views of China, which if you believe the surveys, a lot of that is tied to the coronavirus and a feeling, and it may be inaccurate, a feeling that China's not being 100% transparent. When countries like Australia, for example, have asked for an international investigation, China says we're going to cut off trade. I mean, come on. Why are they being so resistant to a real investigation so we can find out how this thing happened?
We can argue all day long about how open they are to investigations. At least China was the only country that did allow WHO to come in and investigate. No other country has done that. I mean, you have countries that have 10, 100 times more deaths, 1,000 times more infections. You know, why isn't the WHO being called to go investigate there?
Because the virus first was identified in Wuhan, and they're trying to find out if it came from the wet market or if it was an accidental lab leak.
But what about how it spread so quickly?
Well, maybe it spread because that lockdown of Wuhan didn't come until after the start of Chinese New Year.
You know, why aren't these countries being investigated? You know, so I'm just saying, look, there's a degree of openness. Every country has a degree of openness. And I think in comparison, China hasn't done so badly. All right. I mean, we have our own problems. I get it. We got problems. Okay. But I think one of the reasons why negative views of China have been rising in the rest of the world, in other parts of the world, especially in the West, that's linked to the coronavirus, is that debates like this one, the one you and I are having, are not being aired in Western societies enough.
Would this be aired in China?
I hope it needs to be aired in America.
It also needs to be aired in China.
The Chinese already know. The Chinese
I think this debate should be aired in China right now, so everybody can hear this.
Maybe it should be, but America and Europe need it much more.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to give you a slight break here, and I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Bailey, who's got a couple of audience questions coming in. Rebecca, do you have some?
I do. Hi, Eric. Our first question is from Frederick Demopoulos. I've subbed your question down a bit, Frederick, sorry. He says, rule-based societies tend to scale more efficiently, whereas relationship power-based societies tend to be more flexible in periods of great social or economic change like China's seen over the past few decades. So first of all, do you accept that premise, I guess, that rules-based societies are more efficient over the long term? If you accept that, do you think that China's willing to move towards a more rules-based system as it sort of enters, I guess, this next stage of its reinvention? And if that is the case, would that change how the CCP has to operate?
Well, I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure how he defines rules-based societies.
Well,
I mean, I guess.
Would you characterize China as a rules-based society?
Of course, I do. I mean, yes, I do. So
you reject the premise that
the
China,
the premise of the question is somehow China is not rule-based, and only America and the West are rules-based. I disagree with that premise. Different countries have different rules and how they work those rules. We have rules here, I tell you. If we don't have rules, we won't have thousands of these corrupt officials in jail. Okay?
Okay. The second question is from Alejandro Reyes. He says, a lot has been made of Xi Jinping eliminating the two-term limit on the presidency, with some analysts arguing that this is a sign of the atrophying of the party itself and a sort of, I guess what Keith was saying earlier about a move away from collective leadership. What are your thoughts on Xi's move, and has there been any pushback within the wider party against that?
I think the Chinese public and the party in particular had been very supportive of this constitutional amendment. And the country felt that, I'm just stating what I see on the ground here, okay? The country, you can disagree with those views, but I feel that most people here think this was the right thing to do given the circumstances and the stage of development of this country and the international environment it faces. And institutionally, it brought the office of the presidency in line with the other powerful offices in the country was the party secretary, the general secretaryship of the party and the chairman of the military commission. Both of them did not have term limits.
So are you saying that Xi Jinping doesn't have more concentrated power than any other leader?
No, he does. He does. I'm just saying the country is supportive of that.
But that is a change, right? That is a change
Yes.
away from like the Hu Jintao era. So
No,
you said that the circumstances necessitated that change, but what are those specific circumstances?
I've said that the pendulum has swung many times from more centralized power to less centralized, back to more centralized, back to less centralized. So it's nothing new.
No, it's nothing new, but you said there were particular...
This country's institutions have always been evolving. And if they evolve wrong, they'll pay a price. If they evolve right, they'll succeed. All right, and they've been evolving correctly in most cases. I mean, they made mistakes, like the Cultural Revolution was a mistake. The Great Leap Forward was a mistake, and they corrected course.
But I guess what people are interested to know is you said there are particular circumstances now that make the pendulum swing, I guess, necessary.
Yes. Well,
but
let me give you.
What are those circumstances?
Perfect. Good question. Good question. Good questions. Let me give you the circumstances that I think demanded stronger and more centralized leadership in this country. Okay. One, official corruption. Okay, we had a huge corruption problem before the 18th Party Congress, huge, and it was getting worse and worse. And they needed to correct that, and they needed more centralized power to implement the most aggressive, most ferocious anti-corruption campaign known in history, in the entire Chinese 5,000-year history. And they've been succeeding at it, okay? Without centralized power, they would not have been able to do that. Second, they need to have basically move from, like I said, headlong pursuit of economic, market economics and economic growth to a more balanced and more fairly distributed economic system. And you need a centralized power to do that, to redistribute essentially. Okay. Third, environmental degradation. Okay. You needed stronger central leadership to implement environmental policies and laws. All the localities and regions were competing on economic growth. So they were putting the environment on a back burner. And you needed to organize and have stronger central power to put the environment, which is always long-term, not short, against short-term gains. And you need a stronger leadership at the top.
Is central leadership, centralized leadership, is that the same as like individualized leadership, which is what we're kind of seeing now, which again is a change?
All leaderships are individualized. Leadership is always in persons. They don't exist leaders are not computers. The American leadership is individualized in Joe Biden. Okay, so you can't, computers don't run countries, human beings do.
There's still a difference between a committee and a person, but sorry, I'm diverging from our audience questions. I have one last one for you from Dr. Matthias Bock. He says, China is not just its tier 1 cities, and Matthias has lived in a lot of cities outside of, I guess, like, your main big ones. He says his experience is that unless Beijing defines an action, the kind of local government is basically either paralyzed or robotically executing something, which he thinks is a sort of disadvantage, and you often end up with these situations where people don't want to be the bearer of bad news, so you're not necessarily getting like an accurate picture on the ground relayed up to your central government. Do you agree with that analysis, I guess, but also can the CCP overcome that problem if it is a problem? Yeah,
so I think everything's a matter of degree. Okay, you want to achieve a balance that works. You want a situation where local governments and local leaders have the latitude to make decisions on the ground. Yet you don't want to go so extreme that, like I said, the problem with the environment, okay, and the problem with corruption. So you want some stronger centralized leadership to fix some of those problems, to implement the right policies. But of course, you don't want to go so far the other way. The local governments are paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's happening. I just don't, there's always risks of that happening. And I'm sure you can find instances of that happening. It's a big country. But I think in general, we're at a place where, the balance is being kept reasonably well. And I think the country will succeed from this point forward.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to you, Keith.
That's
all the questions we have.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. And Eric, can I just follow up on that question a little bit? And I don't want to belabor what happened in Wuhan with the virus, but what Rebecca was just asking about in that question, could that have just been a situation where local officials were afraid to tell people in Beijing, hey, there's a problem here?
Yeah, like I said, this was a virus that was unknown to mankind. It's unprecedented for hundreds of years. We've never seen anything like it. So I don't think you can keep information from someone when you don't even know what that information is. I mean, I think it's unreasonable to say, okay, people in Wuhan on January 5th, they should have known this virus is going to cause the worst pandemic in 500 years. Come on. I mean, even, when everybody knew, months after they shut down Wuhan, millions of people in America did not think this thing was any big deal.
Okay, we're gonna circle back around because I keep trying to say that there were people in Wuhan who were trying to sound the alarm and they were being arrested. That's the point.
People were, of course, people sound alarms, but how could you know? In fact, let me go back to in the early days, some people were thought it was SARS, but it wasn't SARS. Okay, nobody knew anything.
What's a SARS-like zoonotic virus?
No, it was not SARS at all. Okay, so if it was
SARS-like,
that would if it was SARS, Donald Trump would have been right. It would have gone away magically. Okay, so the people were sounding alarms, was calling the SARS. Okay, then Donald Trump would have been right.
Well, one of the things you'll never hear me do, Eric, is defend anything Donald Trump ever said. So, but
we agree.
Let's get back. One thing we can agree on, but let me get back to the party. Let me ask you just a broader question. What do you think are the main challenges or the main dangers for the party, both inside of China and in its foreign relations, coming up over the next 5 years to a decade? What should they be looking out for?
Yeah, like I said, I think in China, domestically, the big risks and the challenges are when they pursue a more equitable society, which is, I think, the top of the agenda for the party political platform. Okay, this is the reinvention that's taking place. We're swinging from economic growth at all costs to more equitable society, common prosperity. In that process, the risk is they don't get the balance right. Okay, we need to have a balance that we need to redistribute and move more benefits to common people and bring the entire society up. But at the same time, if they misdirect that initiative, they destroy entrepreneurial initiatives, which is what made this country so successful for so long. That would hurt the economy, and that will come back and hurt the party and the country. Okay, so to get that balance right is no easy task. But if they don't do it, we're going to be in trouble too, because the wealth gap is widening. So they have to do it, and they have to take the risk. And I wish them well.
Mm-hmm. How about on the foreign relations side? Biggest dangers, biggest challenges.
You know that better than I do. We read that every day in papers, on TV. I mean, obviously the biggest challenge, unfortunately, is to manage relations with the U.S., which is used to running the entire world and telling everyone how to run their countries, and is finding it very difficult. Somehow another country could potentially even surpass it. And that's a difficult situation to manage. And I think China needs finesse. It needs to stand its ground, because obviously, China should not be contained and won't allow itself to be contained. 1.4 billion people cannot be contained. Their aspirations for better life, for a stronger country cannot be contained. But at the same time, they need finesse.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think these wolf warrior diplomats who are adopting Donald Trump's trash mouth tactics on Twitter and insults and all that. Do you think that's benefiting China, or do you think they need to dial it back?
I think the wolf warrior thing was a made up thing. I think the world is just not used to a China that could talk back. Right, and you better get used to it. And it's not wolf warrior. They're just being normal. They're being frustrated. They're seeing their country being portrayed wrongly, being demonized by Western politicians and media, and they're reacting to it. For the first time in many decades, they kept their mouths shut, and now they're saying, wait a minute, we can't allow this to go on, and we're going to be normal, like every other country, to express our views openly.
For the record, wolf warrior was a term that came out of China, not out of the West. They called themselves wolf warrior.
No, it was a movie that had nothing to do with
a Chinese movie.
It was Chinese. It would be like me calling American diplomats Rambo diplomats, but we don't do that, okay? It was a label that being placed on people who have changed their behavior from the past. But the label was put on them by Western media and Western politicians.
I guarantee you no Westerner I know has ever seen Wolf Warrior or any of the Wolf Warrior movies and wouldn't know what it is, except Rebecca. She's seen it.
Oh, yes, they do. Well, they've never seen the movie. That's another problem. They've never seen the movie, but they do know where the label comes from. I mean, it's being often referred to in the New York Times and CNN. It says the Chinese Rambo-like movie. But they haven't seen the movie, I agree.
Okay, and one last question from me, and then before I get a recommendation from you for an author, one last question. And again, I'm just throwing this out there. I know you haven't researched this. I'm looking at the 7 standing committee members of the Politburo. I don't see a single woman. I see the membership of the Communist Party. They're very weak on women. I thought Mao said women hold up half the sky. Why aren't they half the Communist Party?
There are a lot of women members of the Communist Party. We don't have enough of them at the top. I do hope that we improve on that. We need some self-criticism on that one.
Okay, there you go. I just got, all right. That's the lead of our story tomorrow. We got some self-criticism out of Eric Lee saying they need more women at the top of the Communist Party. Great. Well, last question. I always like to ask our guest. Thank you for joining us here. I always like to ask our guests before you go, because a lot of people are in quarantine or in pandemic, so they're catching up on their reading. What are you reading these days, and what can you recommend?
Well, I'm reading an old little book. I had it for a long time. I read it before. We haven't been able to travel anywhere, and I've been wanting to go to Venice because I love Venice. I used to go frequently. And I found this little book on my bookshelf that I neglected for many years. It's called No Vulgar Hotel by Judith Martin.
Okay, what's the title again?
No Vulgar Hotel.
No Vulgar Hotel.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a book about Venice, and it's beautifully written. If you like Europe, you like Venice, you like culture, it's a good book. It's a good read.
Well, fantastic. Well, I don't think we're going to be getting anywhere anytime soon because we don't want to come back to Hong Kong and do quarantine again. Rebecca just got out of 21 days quarantine. Eric, you're in Shanghai. I know you don't have to wear a mask there. Everything is fine, but please stay safe anyways. And
Thank you, Keith.
I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you, Rebecca, for fielding those questions. And thank you, audience members, for joining us for this talk today. I hope you found it enlightening. We hope to be back with live events coming up very soon at the FCC. Eric has already promised when he's back in Hong Kong and we can travel again, you'll come back in person. You're an FCC member, I believe. I
am a member of the FCC, and I miss you all.
All right. Well, I miss you. We'll get you here either on your own or on a panel when we can do live events again coming up very, very soon. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Keith.
Richburg, and good evening. Thank you all for joining, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, Eric.
大家好，欢迎来到烽火的频道。看完视频啊，烽火心中出现2个字：佩服。烽火啊，完全被李世默的精彩回答所折服，真是令人拍案叫绝。从视频当中可以看得出，全篇采访都充满着对中国共产党、中国社会和中国制度的偏见和质疑。竟然还有网友提问：中国是法治社会吗？中国有14亿人口，如果没有法治和制度，整个社会早就乱得不成样子了。其次，里奇伯格的问题， 中国共产党什么时候对1989年的事件进行清算和认错？首先这个对错由谁来界定呢？谁来评判呢？是由西方国家吗？1989年的事件，烽火不想去评判什么，但是以如今的角度来看，那件事情的处理结果是完全正确的。那时的中国哪里经得起一场全国范围的运动和反革命运动，所以哪里来的认错一说？当然李世默也并没有去直接解释，而是直接反怼，你们美国先处理好150年前的种族主义的事件，再来说我们吧。典型的双标打脸现场。至于网友提问的习近平主席连任的问题，这是中国人民自己的选择，外人何必说三道四？烽火之前说过，中国领导人连任必然是跟某些重大的历史事件挂钩的，是为了处理阻碍中华民族复兴的某些大事的，必须要一个德高望重、权力集中、百姓中有威望的这么一个人来连任。烽火说到这里懂的人呢自然会懂，不懂的人呢说多了也没用。且过5年，5年后你再来回看这件事，一切都将揭晓。好了，本期视频就分享到这里，我们下期再见。